hope you can hear me well, and we spend some pleasant time with each other. I'll talk just a little bit of an introduction for myself. David already talked about me being a business person. I was an entrepreneur for many years and worked in the automotive aftermarket. I established several different companies and was lucky enough to build them and then sell them. So it was a very big part of my life. Things changed for me dramatically after I had my near-death experience, and it was not an easy transition for me. It was a lot of pressure that I felt to step away from the materialistic side of things, to change my business practices and how I approached my customers and the people that I dealt with in business. It was, I saw significant changes and was motivated strongly by Spirit to make all sorts of changes in my life. I pity my family at times and my poor wife, who had to live through those times with me. When I came back from my near-death experience, I slipped into, I stepped away from, would be a better term. I stepped away from my traditional Christian belief system. I tested everything out. I became a very active Buddhist. Here in Colorado, we have a strong Buddhist community and a Buddhist university here. We have a stupa in the mountains, and I became a regular participant with this Buddhist community. It was a shocking thing to take place with my family, who was still going to Sunday school every Sunday while I was learning to meditate in the mountains of Colorado with my Buddhist community. Later, I moved into Hinduism. I still am very connected with local Hindus here. I have a strong connection with a Siddha or a guru here in Loveland, Colorado. And I love this gentleman, and I love his acolytes and followers. So I still support him in many ways. I have come back to embrace the idea of Christ in all of us. So I have gone through a lot of spiritual manipulations and changes after I had my near-death experience. That affected my how I approached business. I started to treat people differently. I appreciated my customers. I learned to make sure that everything that I did benefited everyone who was involved in any business dealings that I made. And I turned handshakes into hugs. And I still am very close with so many people I knew in business. And I love those people and all the things that they bring to my life. I went back to school. I had been successful enough that I could step away from things, and I went back to school. I learned first modalities such as hypnotherapy, regression therapy, NLP. I joined a spiritist community which was based on Brazilian spiritism. And I learned all about that. I learned all about being a medium and spiritist healing, which is energy healing, very similar to Reiki, which moved me into Reiki. And I use Reiki as a healing modality in my practices today. And I went back to university and I became a transpersonal psychologist. And I am blessed to be able to help people on a daily basis using what I've learned, and not only spiritually, but what I've learned as an academic. It is a life of amazing change. And again, I thank my wife and I thank my family for still loving me after making all of those changes and disrupting a world that was, for them, very, very safe and very steady. I hope that covers a little bit of my background, David. Um, it, uh, it's been a wonderful journey, a truly wonderful journey. Um, and I have grown substantially. It's fascinating because I may read a paper that I wrote 10 years ago and and then compare it to something that I wrote last week, and you see the changes in yourself as you follow your spiritual path and as you're open to the synchronicities and open to sharing the ideas of groups like this, where we go and we listen to other people and we, with an open mind and an open heart, accept the words and the stories that they tell us, which help us to be ever more spiritually aligned and kind and adding service to our life as we go through the remainder of our years. There was a book published a number of years ago by by Richard Poland, and um, in it there he talks about a gentleman by the name of Bill Richards, and Bill Richards had two spiritual experiences in his lifetime, and he writes and is quoted in Michael Pollan's book, um, How to Change Your Mind. I would imagine some of you have read that book. But Bill Richards tells us that he was very fearful when he talked to a group of people and told them about his first spiritual experience. He felt that he had exaggerated or was exaggerating or making things sound even more amazing than they were. And he began to doubt himself until he had his second experience. And then he realized that he had forgotten 80% of the amazing things that happened to him in his first experience. I love what Bill Richards says, and I'm going to quote him here. There are words we need that don't yet exist. When you have a spiritual experience, and I'm sure many of you had, whether it be an NDE or an SDE or whatever it might be, whenever our medium is listening to those spirits that speak from beyond, this becomes true. There are many words we need that don't yet exist. We've got 5 crayons when we need 50,000 different shades. I love that because I realize every time I tell my story and express what happened to me in my near-death experience, I begin to remember and see the things and how beautiful they were, how incredibly impactful they were, how subtle so many ideas were that come to me when I need them. It is indeed a universe, a dimension beyond this life that requires 50,000 shades and colors. It's truly amazing to have stepped across and had an experience with the numinous. So my NDE starts on a winter night many years ago, and I was working for a company in the Rocky Mountains. I had just moved my family from California, and I was staying on one side of the mountain and working on the opposite side of the mountain. And this winter night, it had been a very late night. We'd had many meetings, and I jumped in the car and was very anxious to get back to my in-laws' house where I was staying. And driving over the mountain, the roads were icy, had been salted, but still they were wet and had icy spots. And the weather was very cold outside. And as I drove over the mountain, I was finding that many animals were coming down to get close to the roads where there was a little warmth and also puddled water. And I was beginning to get very nervous that one of these animals might step in front of me. As I went down the opposite side of the mountain and was speeding along much too fast for the conditions, I saw what I had feared. There was a large male deer standing right in front of me and in the middle of my lane of traffic. It was a two-lane road. And I had just fractions of seconds to make a decision. So I moved the steering wheel to the left to go around the deer, thinking that if I hit the deer, it would come through the windshield and it would end up in my lap, and the consequences would probably be death. So I took the chance and moved the wheel to the left. And as I went around the deer, I moved the wheel back again and nothing happened. I had hit some ice and wet pavement, and the car did not respond. It was heading straight into the oncoming lane of traffic. And a semi truck had just come around the curve, and I knew I was going to have a head-on collision. The only time I remember thinking this is going to be a head-on. I managed to gain a little bit of control back, and the truck hit my car just behind the left front or driver's side front tire. And the semi truck literally cut my car in half. I often show a picture. I won't tonight, but literally the car was cut in half. I don't remember the actual impact. I remember waking up and the top of my body was laying on the floor under the steering wheel. My legs and bottom part of my body was on the passenger side, and I was literally unsure of how much time had gone by, how long I had been in that condition. I had been totally unconscious. I began to take account of myself and to see what had happened to me. I had been hit on the left side of my body, and everything, my thoracic cage turned out to be crushed on the left side. I was struggling to breathe. My shoulder had been broken, and my spleen had been ruptured. Of course, I didn't know that at this time. I just knew that I was in pain and I was struggling to breathe, and I couldn't feel anything below the midsection of my thoracic area of my spinal cord. So my feet, I couldn't feel my legs, I couldn't feel my feet. A lady came up to my car and looked through the broken window and talked to me, was very kind, told me that the people had called for the first responders and that they were on their way, but that they were at least 35 minutes away in a small town at the bottom of the mountain. And I was very grateful for that. I took account of myself again, and I realized that I was hurt terribly, and that this was significant and serious. It's very interesting what you think about when you're in that kind of a situation. First of all, I remember that I didn't think at all about the fact that I'd lost feeling in the bottom part of my body. I took instead account of what I had left. Later, when I thought about that, as I was recovering, I thought, well, what an interesting response that you would want to assess what you had left rather than what you had lost. And I could move my right arm, and I was still breathing, and I could see and I could hear, and I was very grateful to have that. Time continued. Things got very cold inside the car. All the glass was broken in the car, and one side was wide open behind me. And so the cold winter night was starting to take its toll on me. I didn't know this at the time, but my spleen was literally torn apart and I was bleeding internally. So I didn't know why I was becoming so cold so fast, and I didn't know why I was becoming so tired. But it was from the loss of blood. The doctors later told me that I took 8 units of blood on the first transfusion and then another 4. So that's 3/4 of all the blood in my body. I was losing to internal bleeding. I realized that I was slipping away, and that was a fascinating feeling. And as I began to feel this stepping away, I was able to review my entire life. And I watched very carefully. I thought about each thing that was important to me as I was flowing through my years on this planet. And I had been an active religious person in life, and I had raised my family to that time that way. As a young child, I had felt close to God. I often spoke with Jesus as if he was a friend. And after my review of my life, I said to myself that my life had been good. And I felt death approaching, and the cold went away, and the pain stopped. And death approached me as if someone was pulling a warm blanket from my feet up over my chest, and I felt incredibly comfortable. And without knowing there was anything else, without being sure that I was going to heaven or I was going to hell or I was going into oblivion, I allowed myself to slip away with a very grateful attitude for the life that I had had. I awakened and became cognizant of myself again. And I was laying in what appeared to be a dark place. It had, I was laying in a rectangle. To this day, I don't know whether that was a representation of a grave or whether it was a representation of a doorway. I don't know, but I was laying face down in this rectangle. As I raised my head, it appeared that there was dirt with a mist about it. And I pushed myself up And as I pushed myself up out of the rectangle, I could see a light. It was an incredible light. It was one of those visual experiences that you need 50,000 crayons to really describe. It was a light that was bright and white, but had so much more within it. And it shot and created, the light beams came out and it created shadows about me. I could see what looked like small stones about me on the ground, and I could see the light created a shadow. That was fascinating. And as I stood up, and I saw this from a distance, I saw myself going through the motions of pushing myself up. Once I stood up, I was myself again, connected to my soul, my spirit, if you will. And I looked about. I saw within that light, there was a swirling mass, an opening. It was like a tunnel, if you will, but it was far away and gigantic. I saw also a group of beings, and they were ethereal beings. They glowed with this same light. I cannot say that they were humans, but they had a human shape to them, which was very beautiful. And I looked at this group and they called to me and they spoke to me. And it was not in words, it was like pictures within my mind. I have used the word telepathy in the past to explain this, but literally I saw what they wanted in my mind. I did not hear individual words. And as soon as I acknowledged them, without moving anything, I immediately began to drift towards them. And once with them, they gathered around me and they embraced me and filled me with the most amazing feelings of love I have ever felt. I had been raised always thinking that I was going to be immediately judged. I had remembered the church leaders that I knew, and I always felt that because they're in a leadership position, they in some way were superior to me, and that they were accepting of me because I was obeying the laws and aspects of dogma of the religion. And all of a sudden, I was surrounded by these spiritual entities, and there was absolutely no feeling of judgment. There was only unconditional acceptance, unconditional love, and it permeated everything. My body began to shine just like their bodies were shining, their spirits were shining. I felt absolutely as if I were home. This is my home. This is where I came from. The beings filled me with energy. Many years after this experience, I was in an ICEAM meeting. I don't know if you remember that group or not, but it was very active for many years, started by Elmer Green. And it was as large as IANDS is. And I was listening to a person speak about an NDE that he had. And um, he had seen more than I did. He had gone places within that dimension. And I asked in a prayerful way why I hadn't seen more than I did during my time on in that dimension. And I immediately received an answer. And the answer was, you were being loved and embraced. You had been so hurt in your accident that you needed that type of support from us so that you could make the decisions that you have to make. Going back to that time when I was being embraced again, I understood exactly what that was all about. I was being accepted. I was being loved. I was being told that I am a part of all of this creation, that there is a oneness to all things that God created, and I am a part of that. There is no hierarchy. There is only God's creation and oneness. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful feeling. I was asked a question, and they said to me that this is your choice. You can go back, or you can stay with us here. It does not matter. They asked me, what are you thinking about? Do you feel at home here? And I remember thinking, everything that I had thought was important to me as I was driving down that mountain either meant nothing at all, or I had the feeling that everything would work out perfectly. And that's a fascinating revelation to realize that the mundane things that I was doing every day to put bread on the table meant nothing at all where we are going, where we came from. What matters is to replicate the love and the feeling that everyone and every part of creation is a part of the oneness is what we need to be thinking about. And they asked me again, you can stay or you can go back. It's up to you. And I remember this fleeting thought that pierced my mind. And it was about my little children. I had 3 at the time. And I thought to myself, I'd like to see them grow up. I'd like to see how they develop. And as soon as I had that thought, I was shot back into my body and into the cold and into the broken bones and the bleeding body and the pain that the physical realm offers all of us who are here on this planet, here in this physical realm. The first responders had arrived and they were using the jaws of life to remove me from the vehicle. And they reached in with their backboard, as you've seen on either in your own experiences or on television or in real life. And they strapped me to it and tried to extract me up through the roof and into the ambulance. And it was excruciating. And I remember screaming with pain and wondering to myself, why did I choose this? It was another 35-minute drive down the mountain, and I arrived, and one of the first miracles was taking place. This was a small regional hospital, but it was on I-15 and Highway 89 and Highway 40, and it was experiencing lots of automobile accidents. And they had decided that they should establish a trauma team at this hospital. And it happened that their very first meeting of all the new doctors they had hired was taking place as I was brought through the hospital doors. So there were 9 trauma doctors available at that hospital and a number of trauma nurses from other hospitals who were absolutely the best you could possibly think of and incredibly capable people. They were all there for me. And I was brought in, and the cacophony of sounds in an emergency room when every doctor and everybody is working on you and every one of them knows their job and they're all attacking you from every angle. I remember that this doctor came at me with an enormous syringe and he stabbed it right in the center, just under my sternum, and withdrew, and it was full of blood. And he said, "Spleen is ruptured," and he pulled it out. And the other doctor was trying to reinflate my lung by pushing a tube into my left rib cage, and the ribs had 300 breaks on the left side. And he was yelling at the other doctors that he can't find a way to push this in. And finally, he had to take his 2 fingers and jam them through the hole that he had made with a scalpel to make a hole big enough to push in the tube that would allow my lung to reinflate. It was an incredible experience, And I was and knew immediately that I was in the presence of brilliant individuals who were all intent on saving my life. You know, this was a hospital unknown to me and a community unknown to me. And I whispered to the doctor who was next to me, who was pushing that tube in, if before they rolled me in to the operating room, if there was anyone there that would pray for me. And this doctor said, "I'll pray for you." I didn't know him. He didn't know me. I was just a man on a road in an accident. And they stopped everything. All became quiet, and he prayed for me. And when he was through, the cacophony of sounds began again, and everybody did their job, and I was rolled into the operating room. Coming back was a difficult ordeal. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. The first 3 weeks, I was immobilized below my waist. When I woke up, I realized that I could feel my legs, and I rejoiced in knowing that I was not a paraplegic. I was very grateful for the doctors and all their work. My spine had been literally, they showed me the x-ray, and my spinal column looked like this, but there was no break. So I was lucky enough to have my legs. And then the orthopedic surgeon said, I hate to give you bad news now, but you may have noticed that your legs are immobilized, and that's because you have driven your right femur through the hip, and you've broken off the top of your femur. And we don't know if there's any blood supply to your right hip and your right femur. So we have to go in and operate. Yeah. So I spent the last 3 weeks in the hospital overcoming probably the most painful surgery I have ever had. And when I was finally moved out of the critical care unit, they told me that I probably would never walk again in a normal man. 3 weeks additional in the hospital, and then I got to go home, and I was in bed for another 6 weeks. After that, I began my recovery, and a year later, I not only was walking, but I was walking very well. And again, great medical care, a wonderful prayer by my doctor, and prayers from all of my friends and family. And I recovered very, very well. I still have breathing problems. I use oxygen every night. I can't lay down and breathe correctly, so I'm on oxygen at nighttime. But during the day, I can move around, and I have my life back. I had an experience where I crossed into another dimension. I experienced that life does not end, that life is a continuing aspect of the creation, that I am part of an incredible universe with a loving God who has told me that love is the most powerful thing in the universe, and that everything is tied together with love, and that we never die. We never, ever die. Now, what does all that mean? It's got to mean something, doesn't it? It has to mean something. As I walked my spiritual path after this experience, I walked it in such a way that I was open to synchronicities. I was open to other spiritual opportunities. I was open to listening to what God had to say to me, what spiritual beings have to say to me, what angels have to say to me. And I'm not alone. I'm just part of the oneness. Every one of us have this opportunity to listen. My prayers have changed. My prayers are no longer asking for this and asking for that and wanting this and wanting that. My prayers are much like Joel Goldsmith, as he taught people to pray. Here I am, Lord, waiting for your words of grace. My inner ears are open. That's how you live when you know that God is always speaking to you, that you're part of the creation. Being of service to others is the second thing. The Lord asks us to be of service to others. It's so important. And we can do it in 1,000 different ways. And I won't waste time tonight talking to you about all the ways that you can be of service. There are even very simple things. My lovely wife does service every single day and every single week. She picked out a man about my age who needs extra help and care, who needs a little kindness, who needs clothing every once in a while, who needs a little extra food, and who needs a little bit of extra attention. She picked a gentleman by the name of Orville. And Orville and I have a lot in common in that we both served during the Vietnam War. Orville was a captain in the United States Army, and he was a pilot of a Huey helicopter. So he was an incredibly intelligent man, a very successful man, and a driven man. He was a pilot and an officer, and he had his crew and other people that were his responsibility. He was asked, ordered to, if you will, to spray Agent Orange. And upon his return from Vietnam, the Agent Orange began to have detrimental effects on him. Became ill. He began to have a diminishing of his cognitive functions. And over a period of 15 years, he diminished from this vibrant pilot, this vibrant officer, this educated man, to an age of about between 6 and 8 years old. He lost his family. The military never took care of people who suffered from Agent Orange exposure. And he lives on disability. My dear wife, every single Friday, makes sure that Orville has a wonderful lunch. She goes, buys him a pizza, which he absolutely loves. She goes to the grocery store, she buys him some donuts and anything else that he has let her know that he needs for the next week. And we drive to his house, and this man opens his door, and as if he is a child again, dances to see us walking towards him with a little bit of food, a pizza, and a Pepsi, which he loves. What a blessing that is, not for him, but for us. We receive the blessings. and the world is made a little bit better, a little bit kinder. So I ask each of you to, and I'm sure most of you are already, I ask you, look where you can be of service. And that doesn't have to be something gigantic. It just has to be something where you give a little bit of yourself. And you do it for the sake of love, for the sake of acknowledging the fact that we are all a part of the oneness of this creation. We are all the same, regardless of who we are, where we called from, where we're called to, what we do. We all have this association, this aspect that connects us all. Love is that binder, and we need to activate that love through service. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of Houston Smith. And Houston Smith was a brilliant man. He had his doctorate in history, and he was specifically interested in religious history. And he wrote, I'm sorry? Houston Smith wrote The World's Religions. Now, he didn't just write the history of the world's religions, but he also involved himself in each religion that he studied. So he went to India and he followed Hinduism. He went to Tibet and became active in Buddhism. He went to the Middle East and studied with the imams and became active in Islam. He was someone who literally understood through the eyes of someone who actually practiced the religion. So in his autobiography, the very last thing that he writes, he says, people ask me questions like, do you still practice Hinduism? Or what role does Buddhism play in your life today? Dare I answer, I have forgotten more about the various religions than I knew in the first place. All that is left of my study of each of them is me. I am the result of all of that practice. I am the result of the spiritual experiences that I acquired. I am the result of how I lived my life. So everyone has to be the judge of me. Am I living the kind of life that my spiritual experiences have taught me to live? And that goes back to each of you to ask. Here I am. All I have left is me. So take a moment and ask yourself that question. And maybe, like I do, you ask it quite often, just to measure if you're still continuing to grow and to learn and to serve. Thank you for listening to me tonight. I appreciate it. And I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. That was a great NDE. And I liked your takeaways, and I'll open it up to questions, but I'll start with one I'm curious, did this happen immediately after your NDE? Did you have, in a sense, any choice but to change completely the way you approach the world and people after this, or was this a long spiritual journey?
Both of those things, I felt compelled immediately
Mhm.
to, and let me clarify. I felt it wasn't as if someone was pushing me around or demanding that I do something.
Mhm.
It was totally a change of heart. And I began to see differently. I began to think differently. This was a bit frightening to me because this happened many years ago before NDEs were a household word. I didn't know that I had had an NDE for 15 years. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't understand what had happened to me. I was I was in school and I happened to be taking a class that that introduced the idea of an NDE, and we watched a film that covered it. And at the end of the class, I sat in my seat and I didn't move, and the entire class was gone. And the professor came by and he looked at me. He said, "Evan, what are you still doing here?" And I said, "Well, I just discovered that there's a name for what happened to me, and I had a near-death experience." So, um, yes, was I compelled? Yes, but it was from my heart. It was from how I viewed the world. It was from how I viewed my peers and my family and all of God's creation that motivated me to do. I became a vegetarian. I became a Buddhist. I became a Hindu. I became interested in spirituality rather than a religion. All of those things happened over a period of time, but they happened because I was open to the whisperings of the Spirit and I was following my spiritual path. And so I changed my life. I was open. As I said before, here I am, Lord, waiting for your words of grace. My inner ears are open.
So my follow-on question based on what you just said was, having never heard of an NDE, how real was this experience? Was it something you just couldn't deny? It was how how real was it to you?
That's a terrific question, and it deserves some discussion. Um, having been, I having been both an academic and a businessman, um, having been so concerned with the truth of religion, um, and empirical answers, and um, you realize that when you have this kind of an experience, it goes beyond empiricism. It goes beyond what's rational. It goes beyond what is belief. It is an experience that you cannot deny.
Mhm.
You can't. It happened to me. It's internalized. It's part of who I am. I can't say that it didn't happen. I
Mhm.
can't.
Thank you. I will turn over the mic to the rest of the group for anyone who would like to ask questions. Just unmute and go.
Laura.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. It was very moving. And what I wanted to ask was, thematically, it seems as if people who have had near-death experiences almost always, when they enter the other side, have a certain detachment from the relationships that were so intense and so meaningful here. Like here, we fall in love and we make commitments and we have such drama and such intensity in our love of our spouse, or a great love of your life or your children. And in your case, your children do seem to have been what brought you back, but in almost a detached way. I mean, your feeling at that moment was, well, I would like to see them grow up, not, I'm so deeply attached, I can't bear to leave them. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that. What, when we get to the other side, are those strong feelings somehow diluted? Are they no longer real? Do they lose a primacy there? Could you just speak to that, please?
Sure. One of the things you said was falling in love and all the drama. The falling in love is not eliminated or doesn't go away. The drama does. There's no drama. There is only the matter of fact realization that you love someone, that you know, we incarnate in groups. One of the things that I have discovered as on my spiritual path is that I've had many lives. I haven't just lived once. And in a past life regression that was as real to me as my near-death experience, my daughter in this life, it was my daughter in that life. I've known these people before. There is the feeling that that love is expanded. It isn't just one person. Here we talk about finding our soulmate, or well, that soulmate may have, in my experience, may have been the same person in a previous life or a different person in a previous life, depending upon my soul mission, right? So love doesn't become diminished, it becomes expanded. We're not living in a one-dimensional realm. When you step across, you realize that there are infinite dimensions, and the universe is it's an expansion that is so immense we can't even comprehend it. We certainly can't describe it. We certainly can't discuss it because it's so immense. So things become more of, rather than so pinpoint as they are in this physical realm. Does that answer your question?
I think so. You are in essence saying it becomes less a specific love and more a generalized, expansive love, that what we tunnel in on here and assign a greater depth to one person here, there becomes equalized in a sense to everyone.
Yes, yes. And the aspect that we're eternal. Everything becomes expanded, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Another question.
Evan, this is Jenny Barker. I don't have my picture up there, but I was wondering how your experience impacted your family.
It was a significant impact, and as you are probably aware, the majority, a vast majority of people who have experienced an NDE, their first marriage does not last. And I can tell you that there were many crises. My wife was incredibly able to allow me to move into the areas that I became fascinated with and felt I needed to explore. She gave me that space. And I gave her her space so that she could continue with her perspective on spirituality and her religion. And I never criticized. She never criticizes me. It has been a miracle that we have been able to adjust with all of the changes that have taken place in our lives. I will be married. I was married 53 years to the same woman I will be on June 3rd of next month. So it took a tremendous effort and a conscious effort. I had to do that many times to not say, well, yeah, but what about this? And I just learned that, and I saw this. I learned to keep my mouth closed and allow her directions and her perspectives, and allow her to live her life as she allowed me to live mine.
Mm.
Now, what about your children?
My children, the same way. Some of my children are still go to church with my wife, if you will, even though they live elsewhere. And I have others that have changed their direction and live a more spiritual life and follow a spiritual path. So it is a struggle, because this life is our soul's a journey. Our soul has a plan, and we often don't recognize. I didn't before my NDE. I didn't recognize that my soul had a mission, and that it had things it wanted to learn and do. I didn't know that. I thought, you join the church and you do what they say, and everything is as other men tell you that it is. And my experience has been that God tells you, your soul, when you open to your higher self, your soul tells you what's important and where you need to go and what you need to do.
Thank you.
Joan.
Evan, do you have words for what it felt like to be guided in the beginning, and then over time? It's probably changed for you how you think about it over the years, but what was the guidance like, and what did you what were you driven to do? Just to study more spiritual modalities, or what did you feel like was driving you?
I stepped away from the study, if you will, the words, the rules, and you begin to look at the spirit of what is being taught to you. It is, as I talked about, all I have left after all of this is me as I am, right? Hopefully that is full of spirit, not thinking in a much different way, understanding the oneness of all things, walking my spiritual path and fulfilling my soul's goals for this lifetime. So it's being open to the synchronicities. It's being open. I get direct answers. If I ask, during the day, I'm sure some of you are nodding. You know, you say, well, you ask a question, a specific question, and you get I get a very direct answer. And sometimes it slaps me, right? Because it's not at all what I thought or what I wanted to hear. It's it's direct answers as you meditate, you know, and you open your ears and mind to receive inspiration. These things come to you, and you are not, you know, you're not walking alone in this third dimension.
It's so cool. That was a mesmerizing talk, by the way. It was
Thank you. Thank you.
incredible.
Very
Kevin,
good. Yes, sir.
Cool.
may I speak?
Oh,
Yes,
Matt,
sir.
Matt, do you want to go ahead and then Julie?
Yes, thank you.
I know, and Deb is raising her hand too. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much. Your story is fascinating, obviously very moving. I admire the values that you've adopted following your experience. They're admirable, and I think they scream at all of us to you know, assume responsibility for them. And I share, I believe I share some of the basic conclusions that you've arrived at, that this is not all there is, that this carcass of tissues and bones is really just gift wrap. And I'm not sure what happens beyond that, whether we follow a course of luminous dots, or whether we assume some kind of life force, whether we are assimilated into some kind of the plasma of consciousness that many people talk about these days. But your story I found intriguing because it was similar to another man's story that I listened to. And I'm not a pilgrim in this area. I don't research near-death experiences, but I ran into a man who told me a very, very similar story, in that he, after having this near-death experience, he thought was a death experience at the time, was surrounded by these beings, these humanoid forms that communicated with him telepathically and never opened their mouth, and yet he could hear clearly everything that they were saying. And he described them as extra dimensional beings. And you made some reference to that using similar words. They were from another dimension, meaning that they were aside from our sense of reality or our field of reality as we're aware of. But after you recounted your initial experience, you kind of assumed a different language, in as much as you introduced the whole notion of God. And I'm not sure where God fits into this, unless it's a kind of a respectful term for all of this amazing stuff that we are part of.
Yeah.
It's not a deity, I'm sure, because Hinduism and Buddhism don't really worship deities. It's a life force, in my worldview, it's not something separate from me. It's not something that's giving me messages. It's something that's part of the same thing. As such, is it spiritual? Well, I can pay it the respect of calling it spirituality, because it's so moving, because it guides us, and because I do believe that the universe may have some kind of intent involved in how we move past this plane of existence. But I run short of calling it God, and I'm wondering how you lead to that.
I love your question, and I love your discussion. That is certainly accurate. I grew up with God. I grew up with a God, and to an extent, human beings have tried to describe it, and they certainly make it human. And so many scriptures that we read, you know, it is a human voice, if you will. I did not see a God. I did not see a Jesus. Even though I appreciate Christ. In my discussion, I also use the term numinous, and a creator of all things. Those are terms that I use. I do not. I don't think God is ineffable, and numinous fits so perfectly, because how do you describe it? Native American cultures call it the mystery. You know, I love that. I align with that. I still talk to it. I don't assign it a sex. I don't assign it anything to do with humanity, because the universe is so incredibly broad and again, ineffable. I listened to an astronomer tell me the other day that there's 1 billion trillion planets like Earth in the known universe. So who knows what God has, what the creator of all things, what the numinous, what the mystery has created. I don't see God as the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I don't see God as a specific being. I see God as an ineffable force that created all things and expands with his creation. That's how I see the creator of all things, the numinous, if you will, or the mystery. Does that answer your question?
It certainly, it was well said. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Julie, were you next?
Yeah. Hi, Evan. Thank you for your story. My question, I kind of want your perspective without getting into actual politics, but because of the way our country is right now, you know, at each other, like they're two sides and not understanding each other. And over the last several years, with different things I've learned in spirituality, I'm trying to use these things so that I don't get caught up in my anger and all the other things that I did several years ago. Like I'm preparing myself this time, and it's like no matter which way the election goes, I promise myself that I will not let it affect my health, and I try to think of people that I love them, and I may hate the way they think or speak on politics, but that's like one part of them. But it plays with my mind because I'm trying to accept things as they are and use love and not let my emotions make me sick. And I think a lot of people are struggling, and I didn't know if you had a perspective or something to say about all of that that would be helpful.
You know, in this life, politics is important, and again, as I would tell you to do as following your spiritual path is to follow your heart, I would suggest that you follow your heart in your politics as well. What we've talked about today is much more expansive, and yes, today is a time of conflict, and we don't know who to trust anymore. And you know, the gentleman that told us the news back in the 1950s that I remember so well, and 1960s, we don't have them anymore, and we have so we don't know what we're listening to. So there's lots of things going on in this life. This life isn't about politics. This life is going to happen however it happens, and you need you need to look at everything in a historical way as well. I'll add this one little thought. If you think things were divided now, you should have been around in 1850 to 1861. And look how people thought about Northern materialism and Southern slavery, and how they and whether a slave was even a human being, or just chattel to be bought and sold at the will of man. And I can tell you the nation did divide and did go through nearly 5 years of warfare, and 500,000 soldiers died, and 1 million people died in our own country. So times that we live in are how we grow and how we understand ourselves. And you need to let go of the physical things, and you need to concentrate on how you adapt to the experiences of life. This is how we learn things. This is how we grow. We make choices, and this is a planet where cause and effect rule the third dimension. And if I look at my near-death experience, how I drove my car was cause and effect, and I'm still feeling the effects. So I'm not telling you to let go of politics or not participate or not vote. Those things are important, and those things should be respected and revered. But it's how we react to the consequences of our life that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who else?
Yes, Deb, please.
So interesting enough, my comment was similar, but not exactly. So my thought, I was thinking about how the NDEs that we're hearing about are typically one-off type accidents where you were involved, your car was, you were essentially crushed. And yet we see things that are happening where thousands of people are dying in an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from the soul perspective, I think, so I was a hospice nurse and I do Reiki, and I really have experienced or believe in my own structure that there's a transition team that comes, and that's part of that process of the pain goes away and there's a group to help you over there. And my mind is blown when I think about the idea that there's got to be transition teams for thousands of people at the same time, like the scale of this that is happening. And then, like, what does that mean for us? Like, in this idea of service, like, we're part of a transition team on this side too, right? We're part of what brings us to the place of there's going to be violence or there isn't. We meaning, human race, right? And so when I try to like compare those two things together and think about what's happening on this side versus our side, and like this whole idea of being in service to each other, that to me wraps into the whole idea of politics and that choosing to serve idea. So I really just wanted to see if you had any, now that I've gone on this little trail here, any like input or anything that happened when you were over there, that kind of talked about the global scale of human trauma and this transition over there. So
There's a saying by an imam, an Islamic religious leader, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I can't quote it exactly, but I love his little statement. He said, "If you are thinking of yourself as a puny thing, remember that the entire universe is rolled up inside of you. People die in mass, people die in genocides, we do horrible things to each other here on this planet, and I'm sure elsewhere in the universe. Those people, whoever crosses over, will be met with love, acceptance, kindness. They will be embraced, and they will have their eyes opened to the reality that there is a oneness to this entire creation, that we are part of God and God is part of us, and that it's all bound together with love. They will be given whatever they need, whatever they require when they cross over. And it will be different. It will be different than my experience. NDEs, STEs, the other experiences that I've had, the most specific things that I've ever had happen to me are in past life regressions, because it's all about you, right? It's all about what your soul wants you to find out and discover and internalize as part of its growth process. It is immense. It is an incredible creation, and we're all part of it, and we're all important. Every single one of us, all important. And no one is ever lost. No one's ever lost. Yogananda said one time, and it's in his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a 2-volume translation of a little tiny book. But Yogananda talks about the creation, the actual creation bubble of God, and that it lasts, a creation of a universe lasts 300 trillion years in Earth time. If you get nothing from that except, oh my, it's bigger than I ever thought, that's good, because I can't comprehend the number 300 trillion years. I can't. But when he creates something, it lasts for, here I am using he, when the numinous creates something, it lasts 300 trillion years. And then the numinous does something else, right? So I'm not asking you to believe that, I only throw it out there as a, that's an interesting thing to contemplate. More questions?
Yeah, thank you, Evan. We usually wrap up at 8:30 our time. I don't know how much time Evan has, but does anyone else have a burning question? If not, we might lose him.
Can I read something? It's not terribly long, but this is a book I use when I teach meditation classes. Peace is Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh. Has anyone heard of Thich Nhat Hanh? Some of you have, yeah. He passed away just a short time ago, and he is an incredible soul. He tells a story in his book. He was very played a big part in helping people who were. Do you remember the boat people at the conclusion of the Vietnam era in the late 70s and all through the 80s? You know, people were misplaced or displaced in Southeast Asia, and boat people were leaving a lot of the Asian countries and trying to go to a place of peace where they wouldn't be, and they could live a free life. And it was a terrible consequence. Talk about, Deb, your thousands of people dying. You know, thousands and thousands of boat people died. A gentleman that I hired to do my lawn was a boat person. And the stories he tells about every morning waking up and having to toss overboard the people who died over the night is just heartbreaking when you listen to this. Well, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about something that was going on. And because there were so many boat people on the open oceans, piracy became a really big problem that the United Nations had to address, and the American Navy and whatever tried to take care of the problems. But nonetheless, the pirates would attack these poor boat people, and they'd take everything that they could. And he tells a specific story that he knew of personally. And it was about a little 12-year-old girl who was attacked by one of these boat pirates, and she was raped. And she couldn't deal with that, and she threw herself at nighttime when nobody could stop her. She threw herself overboard and drowned herself. And he talks about that, and he said, pardon me, because I've never gotten through this without weeping a little bit, but he wrote a poem about that because it's so hard to rationalize, right? It's hard to deal with. It says, do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. The constancy of life, right? Look deeply. I arrive in every second to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with wings still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond, and I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I'm the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I'm a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands, and I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring. Too warm, it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up. And And so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion.
Mm, wow.
We are all one. And we are everything that makes this creation. We're everything.
What a beautiful way to, thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome. I'd love to get a copy of that. I'll count on Laura finding it and sending it to me. If you don't mind, David's dying to say something.
Yes, yes, please.
Evan, you mentioned in your introduction that you had 2 NDEs, and I don't believe you.
No, I didn't.
All right.
Said I had an NDE, and I had other spiritual experiences. That's what I meant to say. I'm so sorry if I confused you.
You said you had doubts as to whether or not the magnificence of what you experienced was real, but then you had some second.
I know what you're saying. You're talking about Bill Richardson's having 2 experiences. And Bill Richardson said he always was worried about exaggerating, right? Saying something that wasn't part of his experience. And then when he had his second experience, he realized that he had left out 80% of the experience, that it was even the first experience was more magnificent than he ever told anyone.
Okay.
That's when he said, I need 50,000 crayons to show you all the shades of light that I saw. And I need words that have not yet been expressed to tell you the full truth. I hope that clarified that.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, this has been fabulous, Evan. I can't thank you enough. It was beyond my wildest expectations. That was great.